as the British government says it's identified the person who leaked cables that forced out the British ambassador to the United States for calling President Trump inept. We look at the real-life political thriller of a British intelligence specialist who risked everything to blow the whistle on U.S. dirty tricks at the United Nations in the lead-up to the Iraq invasion. In 2003, Katharine Gun was working for Britain's Government Communications Headquarters, known as GCHQ, the intelligence agency similar to the National Security Agency here, when she opened a top-secret NSA memorandum. The highly confidential memo revealed the United States was collaborating with Britain in collecting sensitive information on United Nations Security Council members in order to pressure them into supporting the Iraq invasion. Guided by her conscience, Katharine Gun defied her government and leaked the memo to the press, setting off a chain of events that jeopardized her freedom, her safety, but also opened the door to putting the entire Iraq invasion on trial. Acclaimed Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg described Katharine Gun's action as the most important and courageous leak I have ever seen. Dan Ellsberg said, "No one else, including myself, has ever done what Katharine Gun did, tell secret truths of personal risk before an imminent war in time possibly to avert it." Well, now Katharine Gun's story is being told in the new film Official Secrets, starring Keira Knightley. This is the trailer.
Katharine Gun. What were you employed to do?
I translated signals intelligence, and I reported anything of interest to my clients.
You're a spy.
Did you get this email?
The Americans want us to help them get a UN resolution for war.
So, you work for the British government?
No.
No?
This proposed war is historically unpopular.
I work for the British people. I do not gather intelligence so that the government can lie to the British people.
Intelligence may be being manipulated to take this country to war.
I could get you a copy.
You're asking me to collude in a breach of the Official Secrets Act. Some call that treason.
Someone has betrayed their government and their country.
You might need our help.
If we do not go public,
we would be conceding that no one can ever tell the people when their government is lying.
Your marriage will be interrogated.
my husband had absolutely nothing to do with this.
He's a Muslim.
I'm sorry?
You chose loyalty to your country over loyalty to your government, your marriage, and yourself. I think that speaks rather highly of you.
Katharine Gun, you're charged with an offence of the Official Secrets Act.
Do you want to risk it all?
How do you plead?
That's the trailer for the new movie Official Secrets, based on the true life story of whistleblower Katharine Gun. At the time, her actions received very little attention from journalists in the United States, unless you were watching Democracy Now! In 2004, Democracy Now! Interviewed Katharine Gun. I asked her why she decided to leak the memo.
When I saw this email asking GCHQ's help to bug the 6 swing nations to get a vote for war with Iraq, I was very angry at first and very saddened that it had come to this, and that despite all the talk from both Tony Blair and George Bush about how important it was to get the UN on board and to legitimize any kind of aggression, that they were actually going around it in such low-handed manner. So I decided that the risk to my career was minute compared to the upcoming war in Iraq, and the best thing to do for me was to leak this information to the press so that everybody else could have the information, and hopefully it could avert this disastrous course of events that have occurred.
So that was Katharine Gun back in 2004. It's 15 years later. For more on this incredible story and the real-life thriller that is coming out on August 30th in movie theaters around the country, our guest, Katharine Gun, is played by Keira Knightley. We're joined by Katharine Gun herself, the whistleblower, former employee of Britain's Global Surveillance Center, GCHQ, played by actress Keira Knightley. Yes, we're joined also by Martin Bright, who is the journalist who reported Gun's revelations in The Observer, as well as Ed Vulliamy. He was the Observer journalist who was working in Washington on this story as well with Martin. At the time, their paper, The Observer, was openly supporting the Iraq invasion leading up to it. Also with us, the Director of Official Secrets, Gavin Hood. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! And it's so relevant to be talking about this today as the British government is talking about cracking down on the leaker of the memos of the U.S., the British ambassador to the U.S. That forced him out. He was forced to resign. Because it showed that he called President Trump inept, and he said, you know, the singular reason that the Trump administration pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal was because it was signed by President Obama and other issues. But they not only are saying they are going to crack down hard on the leaker, but they're also saying they will crack down on the press, any press that reports this in Britain. We thought it was really interesting to talk to you at this time. But Katharine, how old were you in 2003? Again, this is before the Iraq War. January of 2003, Iraq War was in March. Tell us the moment. You're sitting at the equivalent of the NSA. You worked for GCHQ in Britain. And you were, what, a Chinese translator?
Yeah, Mandarin Chinese.
So you had nothing to do with what was going on covering stuff in Iraq or working on that issue?
No.
But what did you see in your email?
Well, it was a memo from a chap called Frank Koza, who worked at the NSA. And yeah, it was just a request from the NSA for GCHQ to assist them in bugging the domestic and office communications of the 6 UN Security Council delegates.
Wait a second. In bugging, in spying on, in eavesdropping, wiretapping,
right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And who were these 6 countries?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot
now. Gavin, who worked on the screenplay
Angola,
and is the director.
Yes, Angola, Cameroon, Bulgaria, Chile, Pakistan, and Mexico. Yeah.
So bugging these 6 countries.
Who were the non-permanent members on the UN Security Council at the time.
And the idea was they would figure out which way they were going to vote so that they could sway them.
Well, no, more than that. The idea was to gather information that they could use to bribe them or, threaten them into voting yes for the resolution.
So yes, tremendous amount of pressure coming down on these countries, because if Blair and Bush had been able to get that UN resolution for an invasion, the weapons of mass destruction issue would have been, almost pretty much irrelevant, because there's 2 legal ways to go to war. It's you either go to war based on a UN resolution, we're all going together, or you've got to prove, a genuine threat to it's a self-defense argument. So.
Catherine, you read this memo. You're working on translating Mandarin, but you see this memo that went out to everyone in your area. And what did you think?
Well, I was just appalled. I mean, my first reaction was shock and anger. And I felt it was explosive information. I thought it was something that people needed to know about, because it was basically exposing what was going on behind the scenes. And the fact that, all the flowery words that they use in front of the cameras about, doing everything diplomatically was a sham.
Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of Britain at the time. Right. And so what did you do?
Well, I didn't do anything immediately, but I went home. It was a Friday when I saw the email. And I went home and thought about it over the weekend. And then on Monday morning, I went back into my workplace and I just... I made a copy of it and I printed it out and folded it up into my handbag and put it for the end of the day to take it out of the office.
You took it out?
Yeah, I took it
And what
out.
did you do with it?
and then I mailed it to a contact who then passed it on to a journalist who then passed it on to Martin Bright.
We're looking at the real-life political thriller of a British intelligence specialist, Katharine Gun, who risked everything to blow the whistle on U.S. dirty tricks at the United Nations in the lead-up to the Iraq invasion in 2003. Yes, in 2003, Gun was working for British intelligence, that's GCHQ, the intelligence agency similar to the NSA, the National Security Agency, when she leaked a memo revealing the United States was collaborating with Britain in collecting sensitive information to hold over UN Security Council members to get them to support the Iraq war. Gun's story being told in Official Secrets. This is a clip.
Your supervisor speaks highly of your integrity. She says this breach was a foolish one-off. Was it?
Do you mean if I leaked anything else? No.
Do you intend to?
No. I've always been very proud to work at GCHQ.
Until now.
Yes, until now.
What were you employed to do?
I can't be specific.
Be general, then.
I translated signals intelligence, and I reported anything I thought might be of interest to my clients.
Your clients?
The Foreign Office. The Ministry of Defence.
So, you work for the British government?
No, not really.
No?
Governments change. I work for the British people. I gather intelligence so that the government can protect the British people. I do not gather intelligence so that the government can lie to the British people.
With respect, Mrs. Gunn, you're a spy.
Yes.
You gather information from people's phones and computers, and you feed that to your clients.
Yes.
You eavesdrop on private conversation.
Yes.
And now you're upset at being asked to do that to members of the Security Council.
Detective, I don't object to being asked to collect information that could help prevent a terror attack. What I object to is being asked to gather intelligence to help fix a vote at the UN and deceive the world into going to war.
600. That was a clip from Official Secrets. The film is coming out August 30th in theaters around the country. That's Keira Knightley playing Katharine Gun, who's in our studio now, the whistleblower, former British spy, worked for British intelligence, explaining why she leaked this memo, which would get to the press, which would get to the Observer, which brings us to our next two guests, Martin Bright and as well as Ed Vulliamy. Martin, talk about how you got this memo. You actually, at that point, had never met Katharine Gun.
No, it was a very unusual situation. We were handed a simple sheet of A4 paper that was had a series of words typed on it, and whereas usually with a whistleblower you would work very closely with them directly, Katharine didn't come to me. She'd passed the memo to one of her contacts. That contact had connections with the anti-war movement. Someone within the anti-war movement, who was a former journalist, took the memo initially to another newspaper, and then finally it came to me. And on the face of it, it looked like an extraordinary story. You know, it's not every day you get a top secret memo, and not just a top secret memo from GCHQ, but a top secret memo from the NSA sent to GCHQ. It looked like a very exciting story, but the difficulty was that it was just words typed on a piece of paper. We had no idea where it had come from, and that's really where the story started for Ed and myself on the Observer.
So you
process of verification.
So you go to your top editors and you say, "I've got this piece of paper." In fact, Katharine had ripped off the top. Is that right?
The top had been ripped off of the memo, and also all the header information that you would usually have was not there. So when I met Yvonne Ridley, who was the former journalist who handed me the document, it was immensely infuriating. And I said, you know, so what is this? I mean, what are you doing here? It's of no use to me at all. And she turned the piece of paper over, and on the back, someone had written the header information. So we at least had.
So it was sort of chicken
leads.
scratch on the back. That was Katharine.
It wasn't me, actually.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
We have to protect the innocent
But talk about this. Your argument to the editors, you think this is real, but you do have to track it down and explain what the header said, who you had to verify this with.
Yeah, so the header information included the name Frank Koza, who was the NSA's head of regional targets at the time. And so we had at least that. We had at least the name. And it also, the memo itself contained language that was consistent with intelligence service language. So we had experts look at that as well.
So you call Ed and you say, can you track down this guy, among many other things?
So initially, we were quite nervous. I was quite nervous. I talked to a couple of colleagues about it, about even taking it to the editor. Because you don't want to take a half-baked story to your editor, particularly at the time of intense pre-war preparation. The drums of war are rolling at that period. But we were within the Observer.
Of course, that's the time you should run the fastest to the editor.
But only with a story that you know is true. Mm-hmm. And so we knew that time was short, and at the time, the Observer newsroom and the Observer itself was split because some people supported the war, some people didn't. But there were a group of journalists within the newsroom who trusted each other, had worked together.
I mean, the
previously.
paper had come out supporting the war. That's the critical point.
The editorial line was supporting the war, but obviously there were those of us within the paper who didn't. And it was a very collaborative place. And I knew that I needed help. And I knew that Ed was an extremely experienced journalist. So I called him and asked him if he could do anything to help track down Frank Koza or the reality or otherwise of this individual.
The guy at the NSA. And Ed, you're played by Rhys Ifans brilliantly in this movie, Official Secrets. But so you have to track down Frank Koza. What do you do?
Well, indeed, brilliantly played. It's so busy. These actors are so clever, and it's like he's more me than I am. I mean, and likewise, the other performances extraordinary in this film. Yes, I mean, these were, as Martin has suggested, divisive, divided, bitter, difficult times. Sound familiar? Plus ça change. The war. I mean, our obligation is not whether we support or are against the war. Our obligation is to the truth, and truth was having a hard time at the Observer at that point. There's a backstory. This is Katharine's story we're talking about, but there is a backstory in the film which plays its part, which is, and I'll be quick on this. I had found a source called Mel Goodman, namesake of yours, who was the ex-head of the Soviet desk at the CIA, kept his clearance, wise man, and he had told me over 2 meetings, we know that Saddam Hussein has no weapons of mass destruction. The CIA knows it. Everybody knows it. 2, there is a shadow intelligence operation going on through the Pentagon. All your favorite names on this program, Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, your viewers will recall them. I hope not for their sake, but some of them will. They're basically cooking it. They're cooking this up. It's not true. I filed that story 7 times to the Observer. I could not get it in the paper. I didn't know why, but I was going nuts, and Rhys Ifans plays the outraged insanity rather well, to my embarrassment. But he does a good job. And so I was going crazy. It later emerged that the newspaper was collaborating very, very closely with Tony Blair and his sort of enforcers to keep this kind of thing out of the paper. So where I had failed with my whistleblower, Mr. Goodman, Martin, with brave and extraordinary Katharine Gun, succeeded. But this needed finding Koza. Now I asked around. I asked Mr. Goodman, I asked others, can you help me find this guy? Because you had to get an extension number. They won't just put you through to a man who doesn't exist in a place that doesn't exist.
Well, Martin, you tried that. You tried to call.
I did rather naively try calling the press office and getting an interview set up at the NSA. Yeah.
You said, may I please speak to Mr.
Please,
Koza?
Mr. Koza. And they said, we don't give out names in this institution, Mr. Bright.
So you find...
Yeah, I came upon an extension number, mm-hmm. And that's when you get through. I tried too.
And what'd you say?
I put on an American accent, and I said, "Okay, Mr. Koza, please, could you put me through?" Who's talking, sir? I can't say. Just put me through. And sure enough, Frank Koza That was a good rare moment. I was like, ooh. Mr. Koza? Yeah, who's that? I said, I'm ringing about the GCHQ memo that you sent. Tick. But at least...
So you've got to prove, Martin Bright, you're able to move forward with the story, and it is explosive. What was the headline?
It was the NSA tricks at the NSA dirty tricks at the UN. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And talk about what happened then. I mean, you were the man of the hour. You walk in, people are cheering you. You've got CNN, you've got BBC, you've got everyone on the line. They want to interview Martin Bright because you've got the story of this memo. You didn't know who Katharine Gun was, who had leaked it, but you had the story of the memo that was going to get the goods on these UN Security Council members, and which would force them to vote for the invasion of Iraq.
Yes.
Everyone's booking you.
Yes.
And then everyone, Fox, CNN, and then they all cancel.
Yes. It was an extraordinary moment. It was, it's every journalist's dream to have these, front page splash stories that get followed up around the world. It was particularly explosive in Chile, which had obviously been used to American intelligence.
Chile was one of the six.
Was one of the 6 nations. We were getting calls from all over the world, and it was.
We got to make this fast. We have 3 minutes.
It was one of those huge stories, and then one by one, the American networks pulled out. We still don't know to this day why they did that. Some of it was to do with complications over an unfortunate spell check within the memo.
Well, this is the key, absolutely astounding moment.
Yes.
You print the memo.
In its entirety, yes. That's
and
right.
But the spelling of it is British spelling.
Yes. So we had a terrible moment where we'd seen organisations follow the story up. The Drudge Report, famous right-wing website, had followed the story up, and then they changed their headline from Condi Rice orders operation at the NSA and GCHQ to British newspaper prints fake memo.
Right, because it said like FAVOUR instead of VOR.
These details on...
And so that proves it's a fake memo, they think, but it's just because the copy editor ran it through spell check.
It was cock-up rather than conspiracy, and it was a terrible moment when I had to look in my drawer.
But Katharine Gun, you're home. You see this headline splashed across the front page, and your memo that you had leaked was right front and center.
Yeah.
You promptly threw up?
Well, no, I was in the shop when I saw it. So, but I felt like straight away it was emblazoned across my forehead. It's me, look at me, target, right here. And I was petrified. I was trembling like a leaf, and I pretty much ran home, and my husband, Yasha, was still in bed, and I just collapsed. Yeah.
And talk about you risked everything. In fact, your husband, would they attempt to deport him?
Well, it's just serendipitous, fortuitous, whatever it is, but his asylum case was coming to an end at the same time that my case began. So as soon as I was, well, we'll get to this, I suppose, but I was
we only have
arrested.
30 seconds.
I was arrested, and the whole process, I think, was just a parallel process that didn't
Well, what's astounding is GCHQ leads an investigation, they question you, but then you turn yourself in. And tell the final results of what happened. When you go to court, you face years in prison. And what happened?
Well, they dropped the charges against me.
But this was how long after you
It
were
was
picked up?
a full 9 to 10 months after the event.
And the U.S. went to war with Iraq.
Yeah.
This is a remarkable story. We're going to do part 2, and we're going to post it online at democracynow.org to talk about the courage Katharine Gun had in revealing this information, and then what this means for whistleblowers today and for U.S.-British policy today. That does it for our show. Katharine Gun, Martin Bright, Ed Vulliamy, and Gavin Hill. I'm Amy Goodman, Gavin Hood. Thanks so much for joining us.